All right. Here we go. Welcome to Book Think number 15. And today I have very special guest Evie from She Was Only Evie YouTube channel. And if you haven't checked out her channel, please do so. Uh, One of the highlights, of course, was a spectacular interview with Jimenez from Spear Cuts Through Water. That was outstanding, but plenty of other stuff to watch on your channel. Evie, thank you so much for coming on, and how are you?
Thank you for inviting me, and I am doing great. I was for anyone that's watching, I was just joking before we went live, that, we should have just done this in person because 'cause we're right down the road relatively from each other. So, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
maybe
next
maybe
door
a part
neighbors.
2, maybe a part 2. No, like, I don't wanna sign you up for something, but
Yeah,
part
sign me up. We'll
2.
do part two sometime. Yeah, we're practically neighbors up here in up here in chilly New England, and 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 it's a nice day outside, actually. So I'm sorry if I took you away from any nice activities outside, but
I got my Dunkins, and then that was it. So it's been a reading day. You took me away from my reading, but we're gonna be talking about a great book, so I can't
yes.
complain. So
So Evie has chosen for her book to talk about uh, "Flowers of Algernon" by Daniel Keyes. I don't have an edition. I read it on Kindle, but
there you
you
go.
got that
It's
maize
shiny.
cover with the mouse there,
There you go.
and yeah, and so um, this was a was written way back in 1966, I believe, and it is actually one of the books on the sci-fi masterworks list. And um, it was Daniel Keyes. Interestingly enough, I was looking him up, and he actually wrote a lot of comic books
Oh,
before he
I
got
didn't
this
know that.
published. Yeah, he wrote comic books for it was called Atlas Comics back then, which was kind of absorbed with Marvel later on. And then he also wrote some EC comics, and that's where how he got his start in writing.
Wow, I
And I
didn't know
thought that
that.
was yeah, that was fascinating. And then his original idea for this story was called Brain something. I don't remember the name of it. Brain.
The only thing I know about this, like, so I'm learning all sorts of new things already, but the only thing that when I came into this or into, Flowers for Algernon, like, it was required reading in high school, but
Oh, really?
it was the story version, and he expanded upon it. I'm sure
Yeah.
that's probably one of the notes that you were gonna say.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
expanded upon it into this more fleshed out novel form, which I only
Yeah.
read
Yeah.
a few years ago, so
Yeah, because he started publishing stories in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, short stories, and then, he was started writing this one, he called it Brain Growth or something like that.
oh, okay.
Brainstorm, and then he didn't publish it there and decided to expand it into a novel, and, it won the Hugo and Nebula Awards, so what a great idea by him, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he doesn't have much else. He went on to go do teaching after that, and which is great. But so a little bit about Daniel Keyes, the author. And this book was coming up in my. I'm doing a science fiction masterwork read along on Page Chewing, and it was coming up like within the next 10 months or so. So when you mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's great. I'm going to
Two
hop on
birds,
that.
one stone. This is great.
Yeah. So all right. So how long ago did you read this?
So, like I mentioned, I read it in high school. I read the story version,
Okay. Yeah.
but I read the novel version. Oh gosh, 2021. So relatively recently.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, they definitely had us read the sanitized story version because there's a lot of this stuff in here that I don't think would have flown in a southern small town school. So, but yeah,
That's
so
interesting, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know the shortest version was, cut out that much, so that's interesting, and, so you were exposed to this in high school, and, um, that's obviously how your what was
thank
the
you.
impetus though, to actually go into the novel version later on in life?
That is a great question. I think I was getting back into reading, like, more regularly, and I don't know why it came up. I think someone might have mentioned it, and I'm like, "You know what? I haven't read Flowers for Algernon in a while." I remember really liking it, and when I realized, oh, it was the story, I'm like, "I'm pretty sure I probably read the story. Let's read the novel just to, refresh my memory if I had read it before." And then obviously confirmed that it was the story that I had read in high school. Um, and I understand why it's taught in schools, but I think I appreciated it much, much more, not only in the novel format, but also as an adult. Like, it for me, is a novel that really teaches empathy.
Mm.
Even if you are empathetic, which I like to think that I am, it made me even more consciously empathetic, if that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah, and I actually was going to ask you, like, what this story actually means to you personally. So that's, like, one of the things, and I agree with you there. It is a story about having empathy and or finding empathy, and discovering empathy in other people and in yourself, and, so I agree with that, and, that's, yeah, it's really, I think, a pretty powerful story. I mean, I just finished it yesterday, and I'm still like,
Yeah, it's incredibly, I mean, I cry at the drop of a hat, so take this with a grain of salt, but, like, I was bawling throughout this novel. It's incredibly effective. Um,
Yeah. Did you have any reservations about maybe rereading it this time?
so so when you say this time, because I didn't, to be fair, I didn't reread it before this chat, because 'cause I'm like, "There's
No,
no way."
I mean, in
Um
2021 or whatever it was,
oh,
yeah.
yeah, so no, actually, because I don't remember, I didn't have that emotional connection to the story. I just remember reading it and remembering the broad strokes of it, because 'cause it's been a while since I was in high school. Um,
Just
and
yesterday.
yeah, yeah, sure, 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 yeah. Um, so I remember the broad strokes of the story, and so having reconnecting to it on an emotional level was a new experience for me when I read it. So
Nice. So were you worried about, like, liking it again when you read it as an adult?
I yes and no. I'm like, well, I know that they teach it in school. Is it just gonna be like, oh, this is fine because it's whatever. They A lot of stuff they teach in school that you're just like you don't give a crap about, to be honest. At least for me. And I'm so glad that, I mean, schools tend to kill the love of reading, and coming to it outside
Right.
of any sort of academia. Um, it can be, and it should be enjoyed outside of any sort of academic setting. Um, it's for the common reader, the casual reader, and, that's another thing, actually. I found how I was surprised how accessible it was. It's very
Mm.
accessible.
Yeah, I find first person in general is very accessible, you know, s to, especially the way it was written. It
Yeah.
was in the journal format, and, but I always find first person very to be more open to the reader as far as accessibility into because you're only having one point of view of a character, so you don't have to worry about, putting pieces together or putting
Right.
puzzles together when you're reading it, other
Yeah.
than doing the same thing that the character's doing?
Yeah, oddly enough, like, it's easier for me to read first person, but it's harder for me to connect to a first person character, if that makes sense. Like, I
Hmm,
feel like there's oddly an extra barrier that I have to kind of get through to be like, "Okay, it do I actually wanna connect with this character even though it's an I perspective? I don't know how to explain it, but
Oh, okay, so yeah, right. Well, do you want to connect to the character? Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that can be an impetus to, like, not wanting to read a first person story unless you already know somehow that you're going to enjoy reading this character's perspective. Yeah,
exactly.
interesting. Yeah. So how does Keyes's style like compare or contrast with with some other authors you've read?
I'm not gonna bring up Simon Jimenez, don't worry. Um, but y looking at his style in a vacuum, like, the execution of this book, with any other author, I don't think it would have worked as well. The way that he uses the actual written word physically on the page, um, is is incredible. I know that a lot of people do listen to this on audiobook, which obviously it if it works for them, it works for them. The physical format of seeing the development and subsequent decline of Charlie's perspective and his capabilities
Yeah.
as a writer and forming sentences and stuff like that is just another added layer, to the story, like, thematically of having that empathy and the intellectual, um, uh, themings going on there, and literally see how he develops and then, mentally declines, and it's a whole 'nother layer, and I really,
Mm.
really, really like that.
Yeah, I kind of wonder about listening to it because how would you convey, the purposeful in the beginning, the purposeful spelling mistakes and the purposeful lack of punctuation and you know the the journal entry look. How would you portray that as a verbal thing in an audiobook? That I think that would be very hard to pull off.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read or haven't listened to an audiobook of it yet, which I probably actually should. I'd be interested to kind of
Mm.
experience that, re-experiencing it that way, but I would imagine that it's probably something like the cadence of how the narrator is talking. So, maybe, I don't know, going faster, going slower, being a bit more stilted in how they say things. So I'm just supposing.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No, it would be interesting to find out how somebody would do approach that.
yeah.
You know, with through method acting or what have you. You know.
But how
Yeah,
did
that's
you like, 'cause I know you just read it,
yeah.
so how did you like it coming from it, more freshly?
Yeah. I I I was warned about this book because by I don't know if you know Livia from uh, Livia
ASMR?
Elliott's
Oh, yes. Yes, 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 yes.
YouTube. She's on Page Turn too, and she did a whole thing on it. And I was warned about this book because it deals with mental retardation and the experimentation on such a person. And so I was hesitant going into it, but I was also warned about how good it was and how well it was written and how well it was portrayed. So I but because I have a son who is mentally handicapped, it was something that was going to affect me very personally, and I had that idea of that going in, but I knew I was going to read it eventually. And so you just gave me the impetus to dive in and tackle it. And so when it first started out with that style of broken writing, broken English, misspelling, and all that, which was making a huge statement about how the book was going to be portrayed with the journal entry style. Um, I was like, that was actually very very emotional for me,
Mhm.
to get into that right away, like, right off the bat, you know? And then, once I saw what the author was doing in order to portray that, and as it moved along, and the subtle growth that just continued to move along, and the way it was explained, and how the character was subtly changing his language from some journal entry to journal entry. I thought that was just brilliantly done. And once I started seeing that, I was just like, I'm hooked, and I read it very quickly uh, because I couldn't stop reading it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I um uh, more I mean, well, in addition to obviously the journal entries, um can we get into spoilers, or are we still
Yeah,
doing?
let's get into spoilers just so to warn everybody. Boom. We're all done preliminaries, but wait, I do have one question for you
Okay.
before we get into spoilers, and that is something I ask everybody, and that is, what's your favorite cover?
Oh gosh. Okay, so obviously I have this one,
Yep.
because it was the one that I had. Let me make this on a bigger screen because even with my glasses, I'm apparently blind as a bat. Um, that is, I actually really like the Sci-Fi Masterworks one.
Ah, you said the same thing I was going to say. That
Yeah,
I love, because to me it looks a little more sci-fi,
yeah.
you know, and
But
so I like the
so,
blue.
a little bit of irony, not even ironically, I'm not sure if I'm even using that word correctly. Um, it's for it being a science fiction, it is other than the surgery that happens,
Yep.
like it's not, it's a human story,
Oh
and
yeah.
I that's such a beautiful um the craft of the writing and the storytelling that you forget that it's science fiction or any sort of genre fiction, and that can apply
Yeah.
to anyone, like that an author is able to make you forget about the tropes or the trappings or the world building or whatever, and just make this story very human, however fantastical or science fictiony it is a feat and a craft. So
Yeah,
thank
the science itself is definitely not the focus
you.
of the story, other than how it affects the character. Um, and the focus really is his exploration of himself, and his growth as a character, with with the fictiony part of it being how fast it is and stuff like that. But other than that, it's all about like we said earlier, just empathy, and him learning how to be empathic, because he wasn't. Um, and he had to learn that very quickly, and there's a lot of the theme of going through it about the difference between intelligence and intelligence, you know, and actual, bookwork intelligence. And so there was a lot of exploration of that. And so it was so the science is, it's what starts the story going forward, because he has to keep this journal for the sake of the experiment. But the experiment is the only science in there that's science fictional, and the rest is, like you said, just a very, very human story.
I so there I'm blanking on, it's either Ken Liu or Ted Chiang. They did a story that is similar to Flowers for Algernon, where it's this very hyper intelligent person, but it's on the flip side, where this guy is is a borderline debatable psychopath. Um, so for I guess before we get into spoilers, like if you read Flowers for Algernon, I would definitely suggest reading that story, and hopefully I'll figure it out after we're done here, and maybe you can put it in the description or something.
Yeah.
And then if you like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the TV show, they did a parody satirical episode called Flowers for Charlie, which is genuinely the the most beautiful homage to Flowers for Algernon and also
Oh,
hysterical. So
no, no kidding. Oh, I have to check that out.
it's hysterical. So
Nice, nice. Yeah, so we got our main character here, Charlie. Um, and it's the thing that really hit me in the beginning is the arguments between the parents about what to do about Charlie, because I've been there and I've done that, and I've had those arguments, and it was really kind of heartbreaking uh, seeing that through Charlie's eyes, and I just thought it was so realistic. It was so well done on Keyes's part. It wouldn't surprise me if Keyes had some sort of experience with this himself in his life, um, because he really hit the nail on the head in an unapologetic manner about what these characters would really be acting like, and because it's very difficult to have a child in that man in that a handicapped child like that, um, and
And
so
and
it
the
was
support
so real.
yeah, and the support system, like, not to get too completely off topic of the book, but, like, the he really and you can, like, obviously attest to this or not, because I'm just going from, external perspective, but the support system around, families that need to support their child, like,
Yeah.
I've got extended family that have, mentally handicapped children, and they're getting much older, so they're, like,
Mm,
having to make those plans of, like, when I'm gone, what's gonna happen to
yeah.
my child and who's gonna take care of them?
Yeah. Yeah, and, of course, this being written back in 1966, it was, the support systems were a lot less. The social support systems were a lot less back then, and, so these questions are, they're important, but they're not the focus of the story.
Right.
They're important to his self-discovery, of who he is and, where what he wants to be, and so I thought that was, just powerful stuff, and I love I was making little notes along the way, and one of the things that came up right away on page 12 was, like, one of the things he put in his journal is, "If you're smart, you can have a lot of friends to talk to, and you never get lonely by yourself all the time." And I was like, "That's gonna come up to bite him later." I knew it. I knew
Yeah.
it was gonna happen. That just stood out to me as like, "Oh, there's a theme there," you know?
There is such a beautifully but sadly, naivety to Charlie's character, um, that I think is not only his perspective of the world and people around him, but everyone's interaction with him. Like, his coworkers at the beginning, they're assholes. Can I cuss?
Mhm.
They're buttholes.
Yeah.
Um, and by the time you get around to the end, they realize, "Oh, this person was always the same person. Even if he got intelligent, with his surgery, he was always the same person. He's always been aware of the same thing, of people's treatment of him, and that they change their minds and their perceptions of him and their treatment of him for the better, and it took that drastic of a
Mm.
situation for them to realize that. That in particular, is probably the biggest part of where I was like, "Oh, okay, I need to take a step back, be more conscious about how I see others, how I treat others, and have a lot more grace and empathy and understanding of, regardless of people's, others, like, mental capacities or not, if they're being jerks, if they're being super nice, like, just give them a little grace." And, you know, other people's actions and how they act or what they say does not impact your ability to be empathetic, be kind, be gracious. And that his coworkers just they had their own arc, even in the background,
Mhm.
is just
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
great.
beautifully done, beautifully done. Um, Yeah, and I love the because he's sitting there saying all these all they are all good friends to me, even though we know, the reader knows he's being made fun of,
Yeah.
and and they're not actually that good to him, but he's thinking that they are at the beginning, and uh, and so he just keeps saying stuff like that, um, and then later on he says, somebody tells him, "The more intelligent you become, the more problems you're gonna have." And I was like, that resonates so much because how much do we take on, you know, as we get older in life, we get more successful and we take on stuff, we take on having kids, we take on getting a house, we take on, cars and jobs and everything else gets more everything's becomes more a problem later on, yet you got to deal with. And that experience and that intelligence and that wisdom ends up having more problems. When I was a kid, I didn't have any problems. I was just like, kid problems,
Ignorance is bliss, sometimes. So
yeah. So I just, it's like he's going through that growth in a very rapid pace,
mhm,
but he's hitting all the points of growth that a child would grow into an adult,
right,
and I love how he just carries that theme throughout the whole book.
yeah, and it's a perfect way you described it. It just made me realize it's a coming of age novel, in a way.
Yeah.
Um, Even though he reverts back, like, he's still you've got all the things. You've got the let's face it, the sexual maturity of
Mhm.
Charlie, and you've got his intellectual properties, you've got just the social aspect of his growth. Um, yeah, so I just had a,
Yeah.
light bulb moment of that, so
Yeah.
thank you.
And his rebelliousness at times,
Yeah, yeah.
which is natural part of growing up, and, and he had a line here that I said the exact same thing when I was growing up, or a little older, but he said, "I understand one of the important reasons for going to college and getting an education is to learn that the things you believed in all your life are not true, and nothing's what it appears to be." And I remember saying that exact same thing after I went to college. I thought that was hilarious.
How did you like the therapist character? And I'm totally blanking on her name, by the way.
Oh, Mrs. Kinnian? Was that
Yes.
yeah. And what was her first name? I can't remember now. I'm blanking on that too, but, um oh, was that the therapist? Was that the or did she just work there?
I don't remember, to be honest. I think she was definitely the one that was just like, "Hey, you should write down your stuff, like, write down everything."
The one he fell in love with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eh
Okay. So, um, yeah, that I think that was, interesting. I was wondering about, and I don't know if it was just me or not, but the 2 women he interacted with, basically, they both want to be with him. And I was like, That's a little coincidental, or maybe a little much, for the purposes of this story." It was just like, should he have maybe interacted with some other people too, um, but I didn't really get a good sense of her character, um, or her reasoning, her reasons behind what her purpose was with him. Um, so I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, I took everything with I shouldn't say I took it with a grain of salt, but, like, it's I feel like it's an amplification, at least the Miss Kinnian character, like, she's an amplified version of I'm what I would hope the author was hoping for from readers of the hyper empathy, and
Mm.
turning
Yeah.
it in that way, and I don't know how to
Yeah.
explain it, but, like, the other character, and of course, I'm blanking on her
Faye,
name.
her
Yes.
his neighbor, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
She she comes to him, and it feels more sexual,
Mhm.
her attraction to him, whereas Miss Kinnian's, attraction is um, more emotional, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, I agree with that. She definitely was a very empathic character, and I think she was partially there maybe to show, empathy from a different side that
Mhm.
he was lacking at one point, and that he had to grow to be more like, uh, in order to really connect with her finally, he couldn't connect with her for the longest time other than just occasional conversations and general friendship, and, so that was I think she represented a point where he needed to get at in order to grow as a person, um, and, so I think that was, like that was the use of her character basically, and Faye kinda came in, she was like this free, fun-loving, uh, totally chaotic person, and, and, but I think that was important for him in order to loosen up a little, in order to, explore life a little bit outside the bounds of his own experiment and his own, need to be intellectually smart, which is
Right,
what he thought his goal was, but that goal changed as he was introduced to Faye, and he realized there's actually more to life than only intellectual pursuits, and, so that was, and it was interesting that, he was always worried about them meeting, and, of course, when they did meet, they were fine, they were just I thought that was amusing.
yeah. Yeah, so, what'd you think about the titular character, Algernon?
Ah, yes. Uh, the mouse, yes. I think the mouse was representative of how much people were not paying attention because they should have been studying the mouse more closely all along, when they were trying to figure out of course, he gave all the reasons why they jumped into human study, um, probably too soon, and that makes sense. I mean, that's, when money's behind something, that's what's gonna happen,
Right.
uh, and so but even when they started the human experimentation, they kind of forgot about the mouse for a while. He didn't. He wanted to be friends with the mouse, and he eventually took him home. Um, but even he forgot about studying the mouse for a little while, and I think that was symbolic of how he grew up and how he was either forgotten about in favor of his sister or was shunted aside, and eventually was taken away to a home. And so it all has this parallel with Algernon and Charlie, and it was just I think that their story is connected. And then when finally Charlie said, "Oh wait, I need to study this mouse so I can understand what my future may be like," and it was just a brilliant what do you call that? What's the
Parallel.
yeah, but also a
Driven.
not revelation, but I forget the
Yeah,
word.
yeah. I'm blanking on the word as well, but
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Brilliant revelation when he realizes, oh, I need to study Algernon. I need to
And
find out what my future is going to be like because this is being displayed right in front of me. I'm not even paying attention to it.
yeah, and correct me if I'm misremembering, like, that revelation, that kind of aha, realization, um, occurs at the
Epiphany.
height.
Epiphany.
Epiphany, dang it,
Yes.
there you go, that's the word.
Oh,
Um, English language, so many words for the same thing.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it happens at the height of his intellect,
Mhm.
right? So, it's this kind of, I don't wanna say, like, Icarus type situation, but it's this, I don't know, maybe illustration, depiction of getting to the closest to, like, nirvana, God, whatever you wanna call it, before you fall.
Mm.
And there's a beautiful, sad, um, kind of, I don't know, realization, not realization, just depiction of that he, in that height, he realizes that, but that's also the moment of his and Algernon's decline. Um, kind of poetic tragedy. There we go.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's just great, and like, there's so many little themes, uh, going through this book.
I was kind of going through all of my notes from the last time, or the time that I read it, and there was one note here, but he, of course, I just closed it again. So, but he says something along the lines of, who am I? Like, am I just a culmination of all the things that have happened even before? Like,
Yeah,
did I
he
just
had
become
that.
who I am when I became intellectual, or am I a culmination of everything,
Yeah,
even before the surgery or whatever? And
right.
I think that was,
Well, one of his issues with, the doctors, was that he felt like weren't treating him as they weren't treating the old Charlie as a person,
yeah,
he was just an experiment. And that was, something that came up again and again. He always proclaimed, "I was a person before the operation, in case you forgot," and, that was his, that was his conflict with the foundation and the university, and why he disappeared for a couple months with a mouse, and, uh, so that was great, and, uh, uh, the, what was it? I was losing my train of thought there. What happened? Uh,
well, I'll also add that, like, that's also a great depiction of, like, I again, the how others perceive him versus
mhm.
how he perceived himself. Like, it's gotta be really hard, regardless of, you know, what attribute you wanna put on yourself or someone else, whether it's, mental capacity, disability, what have you. The social communal perception and treatment of yourself as an individual, like, when that's done over and over and over again, like, how do you hold on to yourself, like, as a
Mhm.
person and your identity? Because when
Yeah,
you're told, something over and over and over and over again, it's like, that's gotta wear you down.
yeah.
And you start believing those things, even if you know it's not true. Like, when you hear it over and over and over again, it's tiring.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
it breaks down your defenses, and, yeah, it reminded me, like, and when he's, like, really got to the peak of his intellectual abilities and, like you said, flew too close to the sun, I think that's the time when he also started kinda disassociating a little bit and had those he's having those memories, and he's always thinking the young Charlie is looking at him from across the room or outside a window or something like that, and, you kinda figure that's the beginning of the breakdown of his, where it starts reversing, where it starts going into forgetfulness and dementia type symptoms, and, that just, it was you knew there was no Charlie standing there watching young Charlie standing there watching him, but it was so well displayed in the book that that was the symbol of his the beginning of his decline, and I just love how that was put together.
Oh, and it's yeah, I mean, to your point, it's disassociation, not only from himself, but also everyone else. Like, he becomes so intellectually superior, at least in his mind, that he even starts treating everyone else like, because that's when he goes away as well, as for like a few months, right?
Yeah,
Um, at that peak of his intellect, like at some point, like it's a what's the word? It's a polarity. Like, you're forgotten about when you have no intellect, and you're also forgotten about and you forget about everything else when you're at, like, the peak of intellect as well, if you
yeah,
think you're above everyone else.
mhm.
Um, so
Yeah,
it's
and he got yelled at for that. You know, he got he was talked to. It was interesting because he was talked to in the same manner as when his parents were yelling at him, his mother especially, when he was a child. He was also being talked to in that manner when he was acting above everybody else, you know? And so there was a perfect parallel there, which I loved, and,
it's kind
it
of a weird, analogy, I guess, parallel, whatever you call it, to, when you're a baby, you have these certain needs, and then as you get older, like, 80s, 90s,
Mhm.
whatever, you start reverting back to that childlike experience of, like,
Yep.
needing more help and more assistance. So that's
Yeah.
a intellectual parallel to that type of
Yeah,
situation.
and we saw that in a, almost speeded up time lapse manner
Yeah,
because of the experiment on him.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know, you get diapers when you're young, you get diapers when you're old, and that's that's life.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I love, and there were some other viewpoints too. There was somebody who said, I forget who it was, uh, like, somebody was saying he was comparing his situation to religion, and that the fruit of the tree was forbidden to man, and that Charlie ate of the fruit, like, and he shouldn't have, he wasn't supposed to. And I love that 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 ignorance of viewing progress as an unnatural occurrence, and self-improvement almost seen as a negative, like you should stay in your lane, basically. You know, that attitude that a lot of people have, you know, about do what you're supposed to do, and don't strive for this or strive for that, stuff that's out of your reach or what have you. And that was brought up quite a few times, and something that Charlie was fighting against, a lot. And then he but at the same time, when he did strive for that, he didn't handle it as well as he could have. And, so there was something to that warning, but it was just a kinda misguided warning, and there was a lotta little stuff in this book like that where you couldn't take it at face value. You had to really think about what he was saying in his journal and what the people were saying to him, and that's just, very subtle, very nice.
Yeah. I mean, much like life, everything is not it's not a black or white situation. It's you
Mhm.
gotta read between the lines, whether it be physically on the page in the book or in the situation that you're in. Um,
Right.
and I will say in general, just generally speaking, I haven't read a lot of science fiction, let alone of that time. But kind of to harken back to the very human story that's being told here. Um, I wonder if this is I mean, much like everything, I feel like all writing is a reflection of its time and it's in of its time. Um, I wonder how much of this is in I don't know, conversation with previous science fiction of the time. I don't know if you like kind of read anything when you were reading up about Daniel Keyes, if you knew like if he was
Oh,
reading a lot of science fiction, like he was like kind of in response to that, or
uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he was submitting stories to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and
mm,
he was, uh, and he did win the Hugo and Nebula awards for this story. So he had to have known some people at the time. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how it related to the
big
other
name.
stories that were coming. The
Was it
the
Asimov
current
at that
the
time?
current crop that was at during that time, which
Yeah.
would have been early Philip K. Dick, would have been, um,
Was
uh,
Asimov during that time or no?
yeah, Asimov was still around. Yep, he was writing, yeah, Foundation stuff and what have you. Um, and Arthur C. Clarke and Cordwainer Smith
Kind of
and
the titans of sci-fi that we
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, so I'm not sure where he stood among them because those guys all had huge bodies of work,
Right.
whereas he doesn't. He only has this. And then, yeah, that's an interesting question of whether he was well regarded or not, or whether they just considered him a flash in the pan. Um, I'm not sure about that.
Apparently he had a oh, I'm just looking. Apparently he has had some other novels. Oh wow, the most recent one was 2009. That's actually surprising.
Oh, really?
The Asylum Prophecies. To be fair, I'm looking
Oh,
at
yeah, yeah, yeah,
this, so take Wikipedia with a grain of salt.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
He's got like about
but this
8 here. Yeah,
first novel, like that he comes out the gate with this novel as his first novel, um, is
yeah,
just
incredible. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Very, very much so. All right. So all that stuffs we said, all that stuff set aside. Generally, why should other people read this book?
I I mean this I don't want to yeah for really the same reason that I love it so much, is that it is an exercise in empathy. Um, I think it's a good litmus test for readers on how they interact with the text to see, like, again, an exercise in empathy of like how do you react to Charlie? How do you react to the people around him
Yeah,
in this story? And you know, it really challenges you um in your perceptions of others and of Charlie as a character. And hopefully maybe knocking on wood, um it'll kind of call you out if you have some relatively, you know, negative reactions of like, oh, why do I feel this way negatively toward this character or
mhm,
this situation. And I think it is a classic sci-fi for a reason. Classic, what is it? Sci-fi masterwork? Yeah, it is
mhm,
a
yeah,
masterwork for a reason.
it is.
And there's a reason why it has, you know, been held up for the past what, 60 years now
Yeah,
almost. Um, and there's a reason for that. There's the universal story of the human condition and human empathy, and
yeah,
that's why.
and I think
So,
and it's obvious that we should have compassion for the mentally handicapped like Charlie. But I think the book also stresses that you should have compassion for the people who are taking care of them as well, and for the people who, even for the people who don't understand how they're acting towards someone like Charlie, and and I think he points that out very well when he goes and visits his mom and sister towards the end of the book, and how that all went, and um, how he was totally surprised by his sister's reaction because he didn't have the story right in the beginning when he told us about his sister in the beginning. He corrected himself at the end of the book saying, "Oh, I was actually wrong. My sisters has told me a different story than what I thought happened." And so I think you're right. It's about compassion and about empathy, but also having empathy for the people who are the family members and who are the afflicted as well. And I think that's a very important. I think it's an important story for
Yeah.
those reasons.
Yeah, and obviously for specifically, the mentally handicapped, but also in general as well for everyone. Like
Mhm.
putting yourself in Charlie's shoes. Like how would you react um y- to other people treating you, poorly? How would you react if you had this like super human intellectual experience? How would you react to Algernon? Um, and yeah, it's just it's a beautiful novel. It's a sad novel, so I'm not helping my reputation of loving sad books. So
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't shed a tear somewhere in this book, I
again,
think you
look at
miss
that.
I think
If
you're
you don't
missing the point.
cry, you're not human. So
I think you're missing the point of the empathy part. Yeah, because I certainly did. Yeah, and unfortunately, the cats in my house would not let the mouse live. But you know, uh, all right. I think we covered a lot here. All right, cool. So everybody, thank you for watching. I will have a link to Evie's channel down below. And anything else that I might have forgot that we talked about. I think you were going to give me a
I
book
will
name.
provide the story, the Kinlu slash Ted Chiang
Yes, yeah,
story, whichever one I confirm that one on. I'll also put that in either the comments or give that to you to put in the
yeah,
description.
great.
So
All right, and so for everybody still here with us, thank you for watching this episode of Book Think, number 15, "Flowers for Algernon" by Daniel Keyes. It's a great book. If you haven't read it yet, do yourself a favor, and I think it's kind of mandatory reading. For anybody who's human.
yep.
All right. Thank you, Evie.
Thank you.